Microsoft Power BI Certification, PL-300, Exam Questions and Answers Set Number 2. You have a Power BI desktop PBIX file that contains a single-page report with multiple visuals. You plan to use Performance Analyzer to evaluate the performance of the visuals. You need to eliminate the impact of visual caching during the evaluation. What should you do first? Option 1. Add a blank page to the PBIX file. Option 2. Connect DAX Studio to the data model. Option 3. Reopen the PBIX file. Option 4. Start recording. Correct answers: add a blank page to the PBIX file. Explanation: to eliminate the impact of visual caching during a performance evaluation when using Performance Analyzer to evaluate the visuals, you must first add a blank page to the report, select that page, and then reopen the PBIX file. Connecting DAX Studio to the data model is the first step to clear the data engine cache. Recording should not be started until both the visual cache and the data engine cache are cleared. You have a Power BI desktop dataset based on a star schema data source. You need to use Data Analysis Expression, DAX, to create a date table in the dataset and populate the table with a range of dates based on the earliest and latest date within the dataset. Which function should you use? Option 1, Calendar. Option 2, Calendar Auto. Option 3, Date. Option 4, DateDiff. Correct answers: Calendar Auto. Explanation: the Calendar Auto function generates a range of dates based on the earliest and latest date within the dataset. The Calendar function generates a range of dates, but it requires providing the start and end date. The Date function returns the specified date in the datetime format. The DateDiff function returns an interval between two dates. In Power BI Desktop, you plan to use M-language to define a common date table spanning a period of 10 years. You need to identify the M-language function that would allow you to specify that rows in the table should represent consecutive days within the date range you designated. Your solution must minimize administrative effort. Which syntax should you use? Option 1, #date. Option 2, #duration. Option 3, list, combine. Option 4, list, durations. Correct answers: #duration. Explanation: the #duration function of the M-language allows you to specify the datetime values that will be entered into individual rows of a date table. The #date function creates a date value based on the date parameters you specify. The list, combine, combines multiple lists into one. List, durations returns a list of count duration values, rather than dates. You have a Power BI desktop dataset that includes a table named Employees containing a row for each employee with the following columns: Employee ID, Employee Name, Manager ID, Manager Name. You need to flatten the parent-child hierarchy in the Employees table by adding an extra column that will contain a listing of employee IDs for all direct and indirect managers of each employee. Which two Data Analysis Expression, DAX, functions should you use? Each correct answer presents part of the solution. Option 1, Path Cross-Join. Option 2, Accept Pathotem. Option 3, Accept Path. Option 4, Pathotem Cross-Join. Option 5, Related. Correct answers: Accept Path, Pathotem Cross-Join. Explanation: the path function returns a string with identifiers of all the parents of the current identifier, which is used for flattening. The pathotem function returns the item at the specified position of a string, which is also used for flattening. The accept function returns rows from one table which do not appear in another table, which would require another table. The cross-join function returns a Cartesian product of all rows from all tables that the function references. The related function returns a related value from another table, which would require another table. You plan to get data from flat files for a Power BI dataset. You need to select a location to store the files. Which location requires an on-premises data gateway? Option 1, OneDrive for Business. Option 2, Personal OneDrive account. Option 3, SharePoint online team sites. Option 4, shared folder on a local network. Correct answers: shared folder on a local network. Explanation: the shared folder on a local network will require a gateway as it is not available to the internet. SharePoint Online, OneDrive, and OneDrive for Business all can be refreshed as cloud data sources without a gateway. You plan to add data to Power BI Desktop from a new data source. You are evaluating whether you should use the direct query storage mode or the import storage mode. What are two benefits of using import instead of direct query? Each correct answer presents a complete solution. Option 1, full support for the Q&A Power BI service. Option 2, full support for the Quick Insights Power BI service. Option 3, minimized local disk space usage. Option 4, minimized need for data refresh. Option 5, support for per table configuration. Correct answers: full support for the Q&A Power BI service or full support for the Quick Insights Power BI service. Explanation: the import storage mode is fully supported with the Q&A and Quick Insights Power BI services. The import storage, unlike direct query, does not minimize local disk space usage and does not eliminate the need for a data refresh. Both the direct query and import storage modes support per table configuration. You have multiple Excel files stored in a folder synced with OneDrive for Business. You need to import data from the files. The solution must not use a data gateway. Which type of connector should you use? Option 1, Excel Workbook. Option 2, Folder. Option 3, SharePoint Folder. Option 4, SharePoint List. Correct answers: SharePoint Folder. Explanation: a SharePoint folder is the only connector that will allow the import of multiple Excel, or CSV, files stored in a OneDrive for Business folder, without using a data gateway. While you can connect to the folder on an on-premises device, it would require a data gateway to refresh in the service. An Excel workbook would only connect to a single Excel file and would also require a data gateway. A SharePoint list connector only connects to SharePoint lists and cannot connect to Excel files. You plan to publish a dataset from Power BI Desktop. You need to ensure that a server name can be changed after the dataset has been published to the Power BI service. Which two actions should you perform? Each correct answer presents part of the solution. Option 1, create a parameter. Option 2, create a query for the server name. Option 3, from the data source settings in Power BI Desktop, update the permissions. Option 4, from the data source settings, update the server source to use a parameter. Option 5, update the source applied step of all related queries to reference the server name query. Correct answers: create a parameter. From the data source settings, update the server source to use a parameter. Explanation: a parameter is the only part of a query that can be updated or changed in the Power BI service by accessing the dataset settings. Updating the server source to use a parameter will update all existing queries pointing to the current server to instead use a parameter with that server name. This parameter can now be changed once this dataset is published to the Power BI service. When importing data from an Excel workbook into Power BI, you receive the error message, "We couldn't find any data formatted as a table." What should you do to resolve the error? Option 1, in the Excel workbook, select the data you want to import, select the Data Validation button, and save the change. Option 2, in the Excel workbook, select the data you want to import, create a table, and save the change. Option 3, in Power BI, add a template app. Option 4, in Power BI, add an organizational app. Correct answers: in the Excel workbook, select the data you want to import, create a table, and save the change. Explanation: the error message indicates that the Excel workbook does not contain a table. To create it, in the Excel workbook, you need to select the data you want to import, press Ctrl+T or choose the Table button, click OK, and save the change. Using the Data Validation button in Excel does not create a table. Organizational and template apps provide a way to implement functionality within Power BI, but, in this case, the issue is caused by an absence of a table in the Excel workbook, so installing an app would have no. From Power BI Desktop, you create a data source by importing an Excel file that contains 10,000 rows. You plan to identify data anomalies within the data source. You need to ensure that column distribution considers all rows in the Excel file. What should you do? Option 1, in the data source settings, modify the advanced settings. Option 2, in the data source settings, modify the edit permissions settings. Option 3, in the Power Query Editor window, enable the column profile view. Option 4, in the Power Query Editor window, modify the query settings. Correct answers: in the Power Query Editor window, enable the column profile view. Explanation: by default, Power BI uses the top 1000 rows for profiling. To ensure that column distribution considers all rows in the Excel file, you need to modify the Power Query Editor profiling status setting. The Power Query Editor settings, advanced settings, and permission settings have no bearing on the profiling characteristics.